What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my watch list ahead of Game Week 28, filled with some players that I think could be looking good to bring in over the next few weeks. And I'll go over kind of the pros and the cons for each player as we go through. If you're still enjoying the videos this season, please do give them a like. Hit that subscribe button as well. I want to get to 275k before the end of the season. That would be appreciated. Let's start off with Reece James. 6.2 million. He's back. He came on in the Carabao Cup final yesterday. It was around the 56th minute, something like that. And it was for Azpilicueta. Now, interestingly, it looked like Azpilicueta went off with an injury. Now, I haven't seen anything since to say whether that's true, how bad it was it just a small knock, is he going to be out for a while? I don't know. But that information could be quite important when we decide to bring Reece James in or not this week. And a lot of it's going to depend on your chip strategy. I'm going to talk about that as well. Because if Azpilicueta is out, there's one less defender that can play right wing back. They don't really have anyone else. Now, Hudson-Odoi or Pulisic could play there, but let's be honest, the difference between them playing right wing back and Reece James is pretty big. So if Reece James is available, Tuchel's going to want to play him as much as possible. Now, the way the fixtures are set up, obviously we're all looking at Chelsea players now because we think they're going to have a double game week in game week 28. It's worth noting, and I'm going to say this a few times this week, we will know before the game week 28 deadline whether this is happening, and if it does happen, they will have to have a blank in game week 30. They can't have a double and play in game week 30 because of kind of FA Cup and stuff like that. So the double would be Burnley and Norwich, which is decent. Then it's Newcastle, which is decent. A blank, okay, fair enough. There's a lot of players blanking that week, so that probably isn't the end of the world. Then Brentford, Southampton, Leeds, and the Chelsea fixtures just keep on being pretty damn good for the rest of the season, and we know how good Reece James is. If you were like me and you missed out on a lot of his points earlier on in the season when he got like 50 odd in 4 game weeks, you're probably still hurting from that and want to get him in sooner rather than later. For me, the only question is, do you think he's going to play all 3 of those games, Burnley, Norwich and Newcastle, after being out for so long? Obviously, if Azpilicueta is out, then it improves the chances of that happening, but it doesn't mean it's a certainty, especially when there's Champions League and stuff like that to play as well. So, for me, in my position, I would have to take out Van Dijk, who has 1 game in 28 and then a double in 29, and is almost certainly going to play all 3 of those games. It's very, very rare that he gets rested, right? So I would say he's definitely going to play 3 games. Is Reece James going to play the 3 games? Now, a lot of people would say it's not worth taking out a player that's got a double game week for a different player that's got a double. But for me, Reece James is a step above Van Dijk in terms of FPL option. Like, he is just more attacking, and Chelsea defence is also pretty decent. So if right now Thomas Tuchel could come to me and say Reece James is playing against Burnley, Norwich and Newcastle over the next 2 game weeks, I probably would make that swap. But as it stands, I'm a little bit worried he's not going to play them all, and I don't think for me it's worth it. If I was on a wild card this week, and don't worry, I'm going to do a wild card video probably tomorrow. I just need to have a bit of a think about it because I think it's a little bit more complicated than people are making out. If I was on a wild card, I would definitely choose Reece James because you just put him in and just leave him, right? And that's it. Just let him play. He's brilliant. He'll get you loads of points. The fixtures are great. If I was on a free hit this week, I would probably take the chance on Reece James as well. But for people that wildcarded recently in 26 or maybe 27, when they've got a pretty good squad set out for 28 and 29, I just don't know if it's worth making that transfer to take someone out that's definitely going to play, barring injuries, all 3 games. As good as Reece James is, if he misses one of them, then I don't think the transfer is worth it. So it's all about your minutes expectations with Reece James. Do you think he's going to play all 3 of those fixtures? If you're on a free hit or a wild card, you probably just go for him. For anyone else that's having to use transfers, it's a little bit trickier. Obviously, there's players like Rudiger who are a bit safer, and if you're using a transfer, that might be the better option. The problem is, for the long term, Reece James is definitely better than Rudiger, I would say. The thing you get with Rudiger is pretty much guaranteed starts. It's very, very rare that he ever misses out, right? He's a pretty much a staple of that Chelsea backline. So it really depends on what your kind of risk appetite or your minutes expectations are for Reece James. But he is back. He played against Liverpool for like 30 minutes and obviously extra time as well. And his penalty was pretty decent too, like a lot of the players. So yeah, definitely on the watch list. I definitely want him in. I just don't know if it's going to be this side of 30 or after game week 30 from kind of 31 onwards. Next up is Philippe Coutinho, right? And one of the reasons I'm kind of strongly looking at him is captaincy in game week 28. Now, I think captaincy is a little bit tricky this week. Obviously, you've always got Salah as a backup option in a single game week. He's playing at Anfield. Okay, it's West Ham. I don't expect them to concede a huge amount of goals. But could I see Salah scoring? Absolutely, right? He does it most weeks. But there isn't like a standout, obvious captain this week, okay? So in Game Week 26, obviously Salah was the massive standout option. In Game Week 27, a lot of people went for Weghorst because he was the only real decent attacker that was doubling. But in 28, it's kind of like Villa have got a double, Wolves have got a double, but does anyone really want to captain Jimenez now? Rafinha's got one, but people are maybe a little bit worried about Leeds. And so it's a little bit difficult. Obviously, if Chelsea get the double as well, then don't get me wrong, Burnley away and Norwich away looks really good. But then you're trying to guess which attacker is going to play twice, or you're going to take the risk on Reece James and maybe captain him. Whereas I think Coutinho against Southampton and Leeds away is pretty good. The downside for me, like if you're not free hitting or something like that this week, and we will do videos on all this stuff later on this week, is the fixtures afterwards are pretty poor. Now, one of the pluses is that if you're not free hitting in game week 30, Villa are guaranteed that fixture against Arsenal. So that is one plus for bringing Coutinho in. But the fixtures from 29 to 33, West Ham, Arsenal, Wolves, Spurs, Liverpool, they're not easy fixtures. I wouldn't expect a huge amount of returns, and I don't know if I really want to carry him long term. So for me, for my watch list, for my team, I have to put a lot of weight onto whether I think he is the most obvious standout captain this week, and I'm just not sure he is. If anything, I think I'd maybe in my position at least, take the risk on Reece James instead, and captain him possibly and just hope that he plays both games. There is obviously a lot of risk in that. I mean, I will probably default to Rafinha in the end, but the fact that Coutinho plays Southampton at home and Leeds away is a big reason to look at bringing him in this week. One thing to note is his numbers are pretty good so far this year. 0.29 expected goals per 90, 0.22 expected assists. I did have a look at the individual results when someone, or the individual numbers when someone pointed out to me on Twitter. So I've narrowed it down to just the games that he's played in the Premier League. So there's only 6 games, right? It's a small sample size, but a lot of the kind of expected goal numbers came against Man United in that first game. Man United pretty poor that game. Obviously, he scored at the back post, right? It was basically, a couple of yards out. And since then, it's like 0.2, 0.1, 0.1, 0.2, 0.1. Not that interesting, really. I would say a lot of that's probably shots outside the box. We know he's great at them, but obviously they are still harder to score than when you're kind of shooting from point-blank range. And then expected assists, again, a lot of it came from that Leeds game. 0.8. So, and then it's 0.10, 0.100. So the numbers outside of Man United and Leeds haven't looked that good. I don't know if we should really worry about that because ultimately the numbers overall for the 6 games look pretty good. His numbers for previous seasons are also pretty healthy. We know he's a good player and stuff like that as well. But it was just something that was pointed out to me that I thought was quite interesting. So yeah, the only other thing I guess that slightly worries me is kind of formation and personnel changes, right? Watkins gets taken out, then he's back in with Danny Ings, then Buendia misses out. What does that mean for Coutinho going forward? Is that better for him? Is that worse for him? It's kind of all just unknowns that I'm not quite sure about. So how much weight to put on these numbers when a lot of it came in 2 games? I just don't know. I think for me, it's all about captaincy. If I think he's a much, much better captain than the likes of Jimenez, Reece James, Rudiger, Rafinha, players that I'm probably going to have in my team this week, then I might look at bringing him in. Otherwise, I think I'm going to avoid him because apart from Game Week 30, the fixtures afterwards for Villa are pretty poor. And I already own 2, and I'm sure a lot of people will be in a similar position. So the Carabao Cup final was pretty useful for FPL, right? Reece James came back. We've already spoken about him. Jota's also back as well at a time when Firmino is out, okay? So every time Firmino's out, Jota's minutes expectations just go up. It is worth noting it's maybe not quite the same now with Diaz in there because they have played with a front 3 of Diaz, Mane and Salah, and it has gone pretty well. And it's not to say that Jota can't come back in, play through the centre, and Diaz and Mane will kind of fight it out for that left wing spot. But Jota's minutes are also kind of reduced because he has played on the left before and now he's probably not going to as much. And he can play on the right, but you don't expect Salah to miss out too much. So a lot of it is around Firmino. The question is it worth kind of either reshuffling squads if you've already got 3 Liverpool players or just using a transfer if you don't to bring him in? Because West Ham at home, Brighton away and Arsenal away aren't that great. I would say if Firmino is out for a while, and I don't know if he either is going to be or we're going to find that out, that he is a good transfer because his numbers are so good. 0.71 expected goals per 90. That's higher than Salah. And I'm not saying he's better than Salah because Salah obviously plays more than Jota does. But if we're in a position where we think he's going to play a lot, he could be worth holding on to or maybe bringing in. I just think for Liverpool, West Ham at home, Brighton away and Arsenal away, they're not great, but they're not that bad either for a team like Liverpool and a player like Jota. Chances are he misses that game week 30 game because it looks like it'll probably be called off because I don't see Liverpool losing to Norwich in the FA Cup. If they do lose to Norwich, then that Liverpool versus Man United game would then be on because Man United are already out of the FA Cup. But again, is it then worth swapping one of your already triple up on Liverpool, like if you've got Robertson or Van Dijk as your third player? Is it worth swapping them out to Jota? I'm just not sure. And that is the key kind of issue with him. I think he always has to be on a watch list if you don't own him and he's fit, because for 8.3 million, he is incredible value when he gets minutes. It's just a big question mark around Firmino, and then whether he's going to play all those games. And if he blanks in game week 30, it probably isn't worth reshuffling your squad from what it is. But given how good he is, I have to put him back on the watch list. So we spoke about Reece James earlier, and that was a good opportunity to talk about other defenders like Rudiger, who is also a pretty good option. You could even double up on the Chelsea defence, depending on your team setup. And obviously we can talk about Mason Mount, but this is just a good chance to talk about Chelsea attackers in general. So as we know, right, coming off the back of the previous conversation, the Chelsea fixtures are ridiculous, right? Maybe even more so for an attacker than a defender. There's a lot of teams there that you could see shipping goals against Chelsea. And let's not forget, right, third best team in the league, pretty decent going forward. With game week 30, that fixture's almost certainly going to be off. The only way that could not be off is if Luton beat Chelsea and Norwich beat Liverpool in the FA Cup. So it looks pretty unlikely that both those things will happen. So they are probably going to have the double in 28. Now for me, and Chelsea fans, let me know if this is incorrect in the comments below. Mason Mount has got to be Chelsea's most most nailed on attacker, right? And it's not just that. You shouldn't just buy a player because they play every single match, right? Because sometimes you get defensive midfielders that do that. They don't get many goals, assists. But for Mount, like, his numbers are just so good this season. Expected goals 0.34, expected assists 0.26. So combined, we're looking at 0.6, which is really good for an attacker from an FPL point of view. I know he missed a couple of really good chances in the final, but he has been converting 0.44 goals per 90, 0.38 assists per 90, 5 points per match so far this season. This is a really good FPL option, and in my opinion, the best attacker that you can go for Chelsea. And obviously, talking about how kind of nailed he is, right? If we come to the FPL page, from game week 14, the only game he's missed without being injured is the Man City game. And I think people were quite shocked that he didn't play that game. Obviously, game week 26, he didn't play against Palace, but he was injured for that. I think he had an ankle injury. Then he was back for the cup final, right? Straight back in. So he is the most nailed attacker. If we're talking about other attackers, Ziyech has obviously been playing well, especially while other players have been injured, but he now has a knock too, and I just don't know if we can consistently rely on him starting every single week. So for me, I would pretty much rule him out of this, but I don't think he's a better option than Mason Mount. The most interesting one, other than Mount, is probably Havertz, right? He's only 7.8 million. If you could get Chelsea's number 9 for 7.8 million, listed as a midfielder in FPL, only 3.1% owned with those ridiculous fixtures we just talked about, that is a really good option. Obviously, a lot of people probably still burnt from this other Norwich game in game week 9 where there was 7 goals, he didn't get any returns, but you can't let that play on your mind. And interestingly, although if you look at, if I just bring his history back up, although he hasn't been playing much, if you look at all competitions, bearing in mind Chelsea have been playing a lot of games outside the Premier League recently, I think he started like the last 4 or 5 or something like that, ahead of Lukaku in most cases. So that is pretty interesting. The problem for me is I just do not see Lukaku consistently missing out to the point where he's just benched for like the next 4 to 5 game weeks. I just don't see that happening. And if Lukaku starts, I just don't see Havertz starting that often either. So I think if Lukaku doesn't play, Havertz definitely starts. But if Lukaku does start, I don't know if Havertz also does. And that is the key problem for me. Again, Chelsea fans, if you think that's wrong, let me know in the comments below. But I think they either have to then play with 2 up front. I just don't see him doing that often. Or Havertz has to kind of take one of the kind of front 3 spots. And I'm just not sure how often that's going to happen either. And it all just feels like a little bit too risky. Like, the fixtures are good, but there's a lot of other players that also have good fixtures that are more nailed on. Like, if I look at my team for this week, for example, I would say that Son, Rafinha and Salah are pretty much nailed. So is Saka. Okay, Ramsey looks pretty nailed. Maybe he's the least nailed out of those 5, but most of the weeks he's going to be on the bench anyway for me. It's just this week he's got a double game week. Like, where does a riskier player like Ziyech or Havertz fit in? Again, if you think that they start all those fixtures, they're brilliant options, but I'm just not sure it's going to be worth it over the next few weeks. So I think for me, for Chelsea, attacking wise, I think Mason Mount is the best option. Defensive wise, I think Reece James, if he was fully fit and hadn't been injured, definitely would be. You can make an argument in the short term that Rudiger is better, but in the long term, I definitely think it's Reece James. But yeah, let me know if you're going for any Chelsea attackers in the comments below. I would love to get Mason Mount in. For my team, it probably doesn't work, but I do think for these fixtures, he looks like a great buy. So let me know who's going on your watch list for Game Week 28. If you did enjoy the video, give it a like. Please keep hitting that subscribe button as well. It'd be great to get to 275k. I will have a wildcard video out this week. I promise. I've seen the hundreds of messages asking me to do a video on it, and I will. It's just that I think that, you know, depending on when you're going to free hit, like in 29 or 30, will probably depend on how you set up your Game Week 28 wildcard. So I need to have a little bit of a think about the best way to kind of present it to you. So it will happen. Do not panic. It might be tomorrow. It might be Wednesday, but it will happen. And let me know if you're free hitting this week. Is there enough people free hitting to do a video on that? Let me know in the comments below. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you again soon.